I started surfing when I was 11 years old. I didn't know what I wanted to do, like career-wise. It was my identity, it's everything I was, it was my purpose. Everything was just revolving around this one concept of surfing, and that's who I was as a person. This dream I'd had since I was 11 years old was ripped away from me, and that's incredibly difficult to deal with.
Why were you so passionate? Why did you love it so much?
I really enjoyed the challenge of it. I don't think that perfection actually ever exists. The only antidote to hopelessness is hope. My favorite quote by far, everyone has two lives. Our second begins when we realize we have only one life. I love cliches because they're all true. There's so many times where you don't want to do the work, but just the ability to put that one foot in front of the other and just attempt it to try and be better than what you were yesterday, that takes courage for a lot of people.
Do you have a good relationship with pain?
Depends what context, I guess. It's very easy to see the physical scar, but with the emotional scar, it's not as easy to see. In making a shark attack relatable for people who will never experience a shark attack, it is a 1 in 11.5 million chance, but we're all that 1 in 11.5 million with any adversity that we face.
It's interesting that when I looked in the back end of our YouTube channel and it says 95% of you that watch it frequently haven't yet hit the subscribe button. So I have a small favor to ask. If you've ever watched this channel and enjoyed the content, please, can I ask you a small favor? Please hit the subscribe button. It honestly helps this channel more than I can explain. And I promise you, if you do that, I will return the favor. We will make this show better and better. That's a promise that I'm willing to make if you press the subscribe button. Do we have a deal? Brett Connellan, thank you for making the hour and a half trip up from Kiama. What made you want to say yes and come up here today?
I mean, it's always great to get an opportunity to share the story. Like, I'm always fascinated when people, even now, like I've been sharing this story for nearly 7 years now. And every time someone's like, yeah, I'd be interested to have a chat, listen to the story. I'm like, that's really cool that people are interested. So, yeah. I guess it's kind of gratitude on both ends, right? It's, as much as it is, a trip to get up here, I'm always grateful to get an opportunity to share the story and hopefully help someone out.
It's crazy, like a boy from Kiama gets attacked by a shark and now everyone wants to speak to him.
Yes, yeah. It's if anyone's looking to have conversations, I'd recommend that's not the best way to go about getting people to talk to you, but it's one way of doing it.
We're going to go in a bit of a different direction today. As I mentioned before, you speak a lot about your story and you go through the whole timeline. If someone's interested in doing that, there's plenty of other podcasts. You got your documentary. I actually watched that the other day. That was fucking amazing, man. Like, congrats on that.
Man, thank you. That's a lot of effort to get it done. So
how long did that take to put together?
From the conceptualization of it to actually releasing it was pretty close to 3 years.
Yeah, okay.
And part of that is it could be done a lot quicker. Part of it's figuring out things as we went. As a small sort of self-funded, self-produced documentary, there's a lot to learn along the way, and there's a lot of hurdles to overcome where you kind of have to, you take a step forward and then you take a couple back in order to keep going forward. So it took a lot of time with that, but then that was something that happened through COVID. So just the ability to go and do the Molokai paddle, which is the second, well, basically the B side of the entire film. Like, we couldn't actually go over and do that for a couple of years. So a few things like that, but it feels good now that it's done, it's out there, and people can come across it and watch and get the story in that sort of format.
That's on Stan as well if everyone wants to check it out. I'm curious though, on a financial side, how roughly, you don't have to give exact, how much does something like that cost to, you just said self-funded. What does that cost to put together?
Well, it's,
because I know you lost the drone during the recording.
No, we didn't lose a drone.
You crashed it,
We just crashed it and revived it. That drone's been crashed a lot of times. More times than I'm guessing Sam would want to admit. But
I got a drone and I fucking crashed it.
Yeah, everyone's just like anything that you don't see, trees, power lines, all these sorts of stuff. Man, the cost is, it's as much outlay as it, like, I think the bigger cost is just time.
Yeah.
Like, if you add up the amount of hours you put into something that like that over the years of trying to put it together, that's kind of where the real cost is. There's tons of other costs in, like for us, a lot of it was kind of based in travel and being able to go and do that sort of stuff. Like we invested early on with the camera that we were going to need for the whole production and made sure we were kind of set up in that way. But yeah, the time cost is probably the most significant. I guess it's the same when you look at building a podcast for over 4 years. There's costs in setting up a studio and buying cameras, lights, mics, and all that sort of stuff. But time is probably the biggest cost, but it's the hardest one to put a value on.
Definitely.
Until, I guess I don't even know if is there a time when you can look back and be like, okay, that's the value on that time to set it up. Like I don't know how you perceive that, but
it's hard to put a value on that. It's just like, if you're passionate about something, you're going to put the time into it, and in hope that it kind of pays off in the end. And for you, myself watching that documentary, that definitely paid off. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people that watch that too. Yeah,
it's funny, like when talking about cost and if it's worth and if it pays off, like my big goal with the film was just to get the story out there, just so it's something that people can come across if they might just be scrolling through Stan, or if they hear about the story and want to know more, there's an access point where they can go and watch it. And that was kind of the purpose of it, not so much to be like, we made this film and, we sold it and made money, because like we haven't broken even on it. So it's like there's that side of things. But for me, it was more just being able to get to the end of it and say, that's the story there. I'm happy that that's in that sort of format. And then a big part of it was to be able to set ourselves up, both Sam and I, as independent production company, to do more of that in the future. I've always said that there's probably only so long I can share the story of being attacked by a shark before I'm, 40-year-old dude still like spinning the same yarn. So I've always known the power of sharing story and what it can do to help people impact their lives. And I'd love to be able to do that for other people, whether it be in the same documentary format or, however that comes. So that was the real sort of investment, is the ability to do more in the future.
Now, the shark attack's obviously a pivotal moment in your life and the reason I came across you. But prior to that, like, what is the context that myself and the listener needs to know about Brett to understand the man that sits in front of me today?
Just everything I did was with the one goal to have surfing as a major part of my life. Like that, I started surfing when I was 11 years old. And from that age, that was all I cared about. I know when I walked in here today and we're talking about different podcasts and sports and stuff, you were like, no, you're not interested in NRL. And a big reason for that is when I picked up surfing at 11, I dropped every other sport I did. I played heaps of other stuff at that time, but I just forgot about it and just wanted to focus on surfing. So from that point, my whole life was just on that one path of wanting to make surfing a significant part of it. And for a young kid who's starting to get into surfing and especially starting to compete, the dream is professional surfer. And you never really know what that's going to look like, especially when you're, 12, 13 years old. That's something you can't really consider until you're a little bit older. But that kind of drove me to really develop the passion in the sport. And then as I did get a little bit older, I looked at, okay, I want the professional surfing thing to be an option, and I'm going to try my hardest to make that a reality. But the reality of that reality is it's very difficult to make it as a professional surfer. There's only 34 people in the world that qualify to be on the world tour. So to be one of the top 34 is incredibly challenging. There's a lot of people that I grew up surfing against that didn't make it, that were very, very promising. So it's very, very cutthroat. And I think I realized that pretty early on. So I looked at other ways that if that didn't work out, what can I position myself to make sure that surfing is a significant part of my life in one way or another. And that was reflected in everything, everything from what I was doing, just being in and around the ocean all the time, to my jobs, like everything I had.
You worked at like surf shops,
surf coaching, all these sorts of things. Even when I finished school, I went and did surfing studies at university.
What? There's a surfing studies at university?
Yeah, it's every time I say that, I feel like it's just the most ridiculous
what exactly
thing
are
ever.
You studying? Like,
and that's a very valid question. The purpose of so when I finished school, when I finished high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, like career wise, and because the idea of professional surfing was still alive and well, I didn't want to commit myself to 4 years of university if I didn't know what the outcome was going to be on the end, and I wasn't really sure what I was passionate about other than surfing at that time. So my mum actually came across this surfing studies course. It's a 1-year diploma. And the idea of it for me was just to get an idea of what sort of realm I wanted to go into, like the surfing industry. And so with the course itself, you kind of do a lot of different topics, but they're all surf specific. So you'll do like marketing, you'll do like event planning and management, but it's all just surfing specific. You do work placement with a surf brand. So at the end of it, I guess you kind of sample all these different parts of the industry and you have an idea of what one you want to focus on and try and target as a career. So that gave me a reason to, I guess, at least go and do something other than finish school and stay at the beach all day and surf and kind of mooch off mum and dad. I had to move to the Gold Coast to do it. So it gave me a lot of great experience moving out of home and being independent. And that it kind of just speaks to, you know, what I mentioned before. Everything was surfing. Every single part of what I was doing at that point in my life was just 100% set up to make sure that no matter what happened, I was going to have surfing as a key pillar in my life that was going to be, you know, it was my identity. It's everything I was. It was my purpose. Everything was just revolving around this one concept of surfing. And that's who I was as a person.
What is it about surfing? Like, I've never surfed in my life, but what is it about being there out in the ocean on a board that benefits the mind, the body, the spirit? Like, because as I said, I haven't been surfing, but I've been in the bush. I've been waterfalls, and from speaking to people, it's similar. It's that connection to, I guess, the earth, to yourself, to other people. So what is it for you, and why are you so passionate? Why did you love it so much? You probably still love it and passionate about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing about surfing, it takes on different meanings for different people. There's something, I guess there is something for everyone, depending on what level you surf at and what type of surfing you do, what type of surfboard you ride, where you surf. Like there's a lot of different variables that can influence why people might enjoy it. For me, it was just something that I really enjoyed the challenge of it. And when I talk about the challenge of it, I guess it relates to the uniqueness of surfing in general, which is that it's just this constant pursuit of perfection. Every time you wake up in the morning, you don't know what the waves are going to be like, or you can try and guess by looking at forecasts. But the idea is that you could wake up the next day and that could be the best surf of your life. You could go for a surf and you could catch the best wave you've ever caught, but that's not going to be the pinnacle. You could wake up the day after that and better that. So there's always this pursuit of perfection, but I don't think the perfection actually ever exists. So I think there's a reason why a lot of surf brands have kind of developed their ethos around like the search, because that's kind of what a lot of surfers are doing. It's just a search for this vague feeling.
That magical wave.
Yeah. and I guess there's a reason as well why a lot of people look at surfers as being like hippies or pretty spiritual, because I think there's part of that in it. Whether, you know, I think a lot of surfers would just shudder at the thought of that being how they're perceived. But I think there is a part of that within every surfer that gets them out in the water in the first place. Like, it is an amazing place to be. Like I said, whether it is in the bush that you kind of get that connection to nature, like the ocean is an amazing way to do it. Has the purpose of getting you up early in the morning. Like, you're out there, you're really immersed in nature, and it's just something where it really lets you disconnect. And you don't ever, like, surfing is, I always preface it with saying how much I love surfing, but it is one of the most selfish sports that you can do, because it is an individual sport. Like, unless you're tandem surfing, I guess, but not many people are. Every time you go out in the surf, you're looking for the best wave for you. If someone else is on a better wave, you're kind of jealous of them as much as, like, it could be your best mate there and you're like, damn, oh shit, it was me.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like, if you're out in the surf, you leave your phone in the car, you're not contactable. If something happens at home, like, they have to wait until you come in before you can talk to them. So it is very selfish in that way. But I think the ability to switch off like that is part of the thing that draws a lot of people in. It is the only thing that I can successfully do where I can leave my phone in the car and I can surf for 2 or 3 hours and not even think about it. Whereas if I tried to go for a walk around the block and I left my phone at home, I'd be thinking about it all the time. Like, you're tapping your pockets being like, where's my phone?
Yeah, you have to be present if not you get taken out by a wave.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that part of surfing is something that appeals to me, and it's something that carries over to today as well. And it's probably one thing that when I do reflect on what surfing means for me in general, the things that I carry to, like, when people ask me that question, what do you love about surfing today? It's different from what it was before, like when I was growing up or when competing was everything I cared about, and doing all of that stuff was what I consider my purpose in surfing. The things I love about it today, it is about that connection to nature and about getting out there and kind of, it's that almost mindfulness practice of just being in that moment and enjoying the ocean, and that, which I think speaks back to what I really enjoyed about it at the start, and kind of bypassing all that stuff in the middle. When I had it taken away from me as a result of the shark attack, it got me to reassess what it actually meant to me. And it wasn't so much about winning events or competing. For me, what I loved about it most was that feeling of the very first wave I got, which was the best wave I ever got. And then from that point, I've had countless best waves ever. And I think that's something that I've always loved about the sport, which is true to why I still love it today.
It's crazy that you don't realize how much you love something or why you love it until it's taken away from you.
Yeah.
Like we can get so caught up in chasing, as you said, the next thing, or going pro, that you actually forget to actually reflect. I'm like, why am I doing this? It's for connection. It's mindfulness, presence. We get so caught up in it, and everyone does that. And I think the biggest reason why I wanted you to come on here today was you're making an unrelatable topic of getting attacked by a shark relatable to people, because it does transfer into other areas of life. And talking into that shark attack, you mentioned it as the best day of your life. Why?
To summarize it, it's given me so much more than it's taken away. And that's not something that I woke up in hospital and was like, this was an awesome day. Like, it took a lot of time to get to that point where I could actually sit back and be like, well, what do I have now that I didn't have before? And what's been lost, where you can actually reflect on what it all means to you. And that this is something that didn't happen for a number of months, nearly almost a year afterwards. But the biggest difference between the person I was before the attack and the person I am now is everything I was doing before was for me. And that's why I kind of single surfing out as a very selfish sport, is because I was really involved in that side of it, especially in competition. But now it has given me a story, and it's given me an opportunity to share that story with the ability where it might impact someone's life in a positive way. And that is something I didn't have before. And when I was working in a surf shop, I could sell someone a board that would make their day maybe, but you could never change someone's life. And that's something that I know today by sharing the story. Just having the opportunity to do that is something that I'm incredibly grateful for. And it's why I do what I do. I could, by the end of all this, whenever that is, I can look back and say, for every audience I got up in front of and spoke to, for every podcast I did, for every article I wrote, for every film I made, if it helped one person, then that's one person I couldn't have helped before. And for that reason, that is why it's the best day of my life.
Did you have a identity crisis when all this happened? Like, your identity was really surfing. Then the shark attack, you can't surf anymore. What was that period like? Did you struggle a lot mentally during then?
That was the hardest thing to deal with. It really was that loss of purpose and identity.
Because they told you couldn't surf again.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So when I woke up in hospital, I basically they kind of do like an assessment, and they tell you what's lost, what's the prognosis, and they go, you've lost 3/4 of your left quad. It's a really important muscle for doing basic things like walking, because what the quad muscle does is it helps straighten the leg out. That's the function of it. So you don't realize that you have to straighten your leg out every time you take a step forwards, but it's part of that function. So they were saying, yeah, walking is going to be a big challenge, and all the problems that you're going to have associated with the mechanics of walking around and stuff. They're like, surfing for you that's a pipe dream. Like, that's something that is not going to be an option. So despite the fact that they were able to do an operation to save my leg from amputation in the first place, where they take the lat muscle from my back and transplant that. Yeah. So it's amazing what they can do in an operating theater, but something they haven't quite perfected in the medical system is how to deal and deliver bad news. And it's something that countless people have had to overcome at some stage in life. Like, I'm not the first person to have been told bad news by doctors.
It's like they tell you the worst case scenario.
Definitely.
So it kind of covers their ass.
and there's two sides to that, I think. I've spoken to a ton of people that say, I can't believe that they do that. And I'm like, I can see why, because you don't want to give someone false hope. and they go, okay, everything's going to be fine. And then it's not fine. And then they look at the doctor and they're like, you know what, what were you telling me that for? But on the other side of things, like when your actions are so influenced by your mindset towards something, if your mindset's negative from the outset, then it's really hard for you to develop some sort of mindset to want to push through it, especially if you're being told that, you know, the worst case scenario of things. And like that took me a while to figure out. There's actually a guy when I was still in hospital that taught me a really good lesson around that. I spent 5 weeks in hospital. First week I was in intensive care, and then I had 3 weeks on just a general ward, and then I spent a week in rehab. And when I was in rehab, I was in a room with 3 other stroke victims. And there was one guy who lived close to me, and he'd heard about the attack and heard about me, and I had a good time chatting to him, and he was talking to me about his own journey. And it's funny, like he was saying, look, you're in a pretty good position to make some sort of recovery because you're young and you're fit. He's like, I'm sure you've heard that before, but he said, I've had conflicting messages as I've gone. And this is him telling me his story. And he was about 70 years old, and this was the 3rd time that he'd had a stroke. He had one when he was like 40, and then about 55, and then 70. And he said, when I was 40, had the stroke, got through everything he needed to do in hospital. And the messages he was getting from the doctors was like, you're young, you're pretty fit, like you'll be able to make a pretty good go at recovery. And second time, it was like a little bit more down. It's like, oh, it's like second stroke. It's not looking that great. But look, you know, you're in your 50s. You still got plenty of life ahead of you. We'll get you into rehab and see how you go. But this time it was, man, you should be lucky to be alive. And he'd heard those words. And for him, he's like, I've been through this twice. I know what it takes in order to kind of get through this and to be able to learn to walk again and do all these other things. So he's like, I know what to do. He goes, I'm not going to listen to what they say because I know that like I've been through it and I can actually put one step in front of the other and try and work through that recovery. But he said the unfortunate thing he's referencing the other 2 people in the room. He's like, they're the same age as me, but this is their first stroke and they're getting told the same thing that I'm getting told. He's like, I can guarantee their outcomes are going to be a lot different than mine. Mm. And I think that is such a significant thing to reflect on when it comes to whatever mindset you have to try and overcome something, especially when you're being told like you'll never surf again, despite the fact that, yeah, I might be able to make some sort of recovery. I was still so negative on the fact that even if I was able to gain back something like walking, like surfing for me was, even if I could just stand up on a surfboard, it wouldn't be the surfing that I was doing before. Like it wouldn't have the same meaning for me. And I guess part of that was just tied up in the fact that, you know, this dream I'd had since I was 11 years old was ripped away from me. And that's incredibly difficult to deal with. And then you take another step back and you're like, well, what are people going to think of this surf coach who can't surf? Like, why am I going to buy a surfboard off someone who doesn't know how it goes? And then you take another step back and you're like, well, what does surfing actually mean to me? Like, what am I going to do every single day if I can't follow my morning ritual and go down to the beach, have a look at the waves and go for a surf? On top of that, it's like, well, all of my friends are surfers. So what does that say about my friendship groups? So there's this huge identity crisis when you are faced with the prospect of losing something that makes up not only a big part of your life, but every single factor of it. That was the hardest thing that I had to kind of reason with. And I think when you are struggling with that, there's definitely like a grieving process that you go through, and it takes a bit of time to come to terms with what it means to you. But in those early days, it was all catastrophe. Like I was, you know, not really being able to look forward and see any sort of positivity in my future. I was feeling like the victim. I was looking at the odds of being attacked by a shark and asking myself, like, why am I the one in 11.5 million who has had this terrible thing happen to them? Like that's something that's incredibly difficult to deal with. And once you start going on that downward slope of negative self-talk, that's when it gets really hard to see the path forward. And that, like, to kind of get back to that, the question that you asked, that was the real struggle for me.
How does someone overcome something like that? Especially those late nights in the hospital when everyone's gone, you're there by yourself, you're just in your head. What's that like? How do you process? How do you move through that to now be where you are today?
Yeah, man, those hospital nights.
Like hospitals are depressing as they are.
Yeah, whether it's the food, whether it's the temperature, it's long nights. because all those people you had next to you saying like things are gonna be all right, like keep your head up, are gone. It's just you and your thoughts, and that's when things can really spiral out of control. I kind of talk about the feeling of hopelessness I had in that moment, and hopelessness about what future was going to look like, and all of these sorts of things. And I guess the only antidote to hopelessness is hope. And for me, I didn't really know where to find hope. I'm incredibly lucky that I had some amazing support around me, and these are the people that started providing hope to me. There's a couple of different instances, whether it was a conversation my dad had with me, where he started to outline ways in which my experience was impacting those around me, like my family, to make me feel a little bit less alone. Like he was my first introduction into any sort of formal support to actually talk about what I was going through. That was a small bit of hope. The message I got from my physiotherapist, and this is something that happened really early on. He messaged me on my birthday, which was my 4th day in hospital.
Oh, so is that close to your birthday?
Yeah. So it's like the timeline goes, 30th of March was the attack. And then I go into hospital. And then on the 3rd of April is when I got the big surgery to save my leg, which is the same day as my birthday. So good birthday present to receive, like saving your leg. Probably not the best way to spend your birthday.
Yeah.
But that same day, my physio, he sent me a message. The only reason I can recall it was on my birthday is because I got a screenshot of the message and it says, "Happy birthday." And he said he wanted to help out. And then he said, "I got a couple of words of advice for you." And his words of advice were, regardless of the prognosis, if you've got a long road ahead of you, people fail not from aiming too high and missing, but from aiming too low and hitting. Look ahead with determination and set lofty goals. These small bits of hope were kind of what they didn't solve everything straight away. It's not like I was able to like read the message and spring up out of bed. They were just those little, I guess, check marks that made me see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And then it was kind of dealing with that information and saying, okay, well, how can I apply it to what I've got? And that's where I think the goals is pretty tangible, especially once you can start working into the rehab. But the support through not only my family, but like my dad and linking us into a counselor so I could actually talk was huge.
We just spoke then about the struggles in hospital and the rehab and stuff. But from doing a bit of research, have you been able to deal with adversity quite well during your upbringing? Because like from what I've seen, during the shark attack, you knew not to look at the injury because that would fucking make you freak out. During the attack, they speak about fight, flight, or freeze, and freeze is like a bad thing. But for you, you explained it as like freezing allowed you to process what was happening in your next move. So in that moment, you were kind of mindful. And then in the helicopter, you had that dream about rehab. You're already thinking about the next step ahead of you. So for you, have you been able to deal with adversity pretty well during your life?
To be honest, there's no specific times in life up until that point where I'd had to deal with any sort of significant adversity.
Yeah, okay.
I was like anyone. You'd have your bad days or your bad weeks, but to be honest, like I grew up in a very privileged situation. Like I grew up in a small seaside town, amazing family. Like I got to spend every morning in the water surfing before I went to school. I never faced anything up until that point which had really forced me to display any sort of resilience. And that's why when I think, like as you were outlining those different things, it might seem as though like I was almost trained to do them, but I think instinct has a lot to say with how we respond to a lot of different situations.
We're resilient, bro. It's crazy how the human body and mind can adapt to the situations that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that is within everyone. Whether people realize it or not is probably a bit of a different question. And sometimes you don't really know how you're going to respond until you're actually in the situation for yourself. And I don't know why it was the right move to not look down. It was just response. It was just instinct. I don't know why I was so calm throughout all that, the time on the beach. And all of these things that kind of were really positive, they weren't because of decisions of myself. They were kind of just things that happened that I was very lucky that were there. And that's how I always balance out everything that I've experienced with luck. And I guess that kind of goes into why I find it very easy to be able to overcome any sort of fears or anxieties that I have in sharing the story because I know how easily my entire situation could have gone the other way. And that's something that's not lost on me. Like, I was incredibly unlucky to be attacked by a shark. Like I mentioned the numerical odds of it before, but from that specific moment, every single thing after that happened, whether it was the fact that my mate Joel was out there surfing with me and decided to paddle towards me, whether it was the 2 nurses on the beach, whether it was any of the other rescue efforts, or, you know, any of those specific things that you mentioned before with not looking down, like, they're just small bits of luck that happen to break in my favor. And you never know what that outcome is going to be. I guess it kind of draws to the point that, you know, in making a shark attack relatable for people who will never experience a shark attack, it is a 1 in 11.5 million chance, but we're all that 1 in 11.5 million with any adversity that we face. And some people are going to experience something at some point. Well, everyone's going to experience something at some point in life, which is going to cause them to be resilient. It's probably not going to be a shark attack for a lot of people, but every single day we have that probability that something could happen. And at the end of the day, some people are going to have good reactions to that, or lucky reactions in my case, and some people are going to react completely differently. But when it comes to having the ability to actually put the things in place to bounce back and to be resilient, I'd like to think a lot of people would, based on that instinct and that response, kind of know what to do, or at the very least have some sort of guidance to help them get through it if you have the right people around you.
How do you feel resilience is built? Do you think a lot of it is instinct for you, like in that moment, the shark attack, that was instinct for you to do those things? But do you feel like resilience can be built as well?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like, the best way to think about it is a muscle. And like, when I speak about resilience, I kind of break it down a little bit more specifically into like what you actually do to overcome the obstacle that's in front of you. And for me, I break that down into kind of 3 separate areas. And they're kind of categorized by the conversation that I have with my dad, which is around the support and reaching out, having those conversations. There's the mindsets, which came through goal setting and having people like Scott, my physio, on my side. And then it's just about the tangible things you do every single day to look after your mental health. And that's where it got tricky for me, because what I would have done in the past, those tangible things, was surfing. And I kind of had to build those little strategies up one by one, which was a challenge. But those things, you don't just do them when you're going through a tough time. They're things that you can do every single day. And it's more about knowing what it is that you can do to bounce back. That is what holds real value in building resilience. So that's the thing. Like, at the start, when I was laying in a hospital bed, the reason that I felt so hopeless is because I didn't know what to do. If you put me back in the hospital bed today, I'm not going to say I will overcome it quicker or get back on my feet faster or get back in the water and surf quicker, or it's going to be any less painful, but knowing what to do can take so much of the fear of the uncertainty that was really the biggest thing that was preventing me from taking that first step in the first place. To take that away and to kind of, I guess in a way, take the handbrake off is such an important piece. And if you don't know what to do, you can't really take that first step. So if you put me back in the hospital bed, I would know straight away what to do. It's still, you're going to have to deal with the trauma that you've gone through. But even just knowing in the back of my head, like, what worked for me last time was this. What didn't work for me was this. So I'm going to avoid the thing that didn't work, and I know what does work. And every situation is going to require a different kind of concoction of things that will help you get through it. But that's one of the biggest things when it comes to resilience being built and how we can bounce back or kind of get through the different adversities that we face. If you know what to do, then that's the biggest thing. And that's why I say it can be built, because we can work that out at any stage.
It relates to what we were speaking about prior when it came to Elephant Trail. Like, you went and did the track prior to actually racing it, because you knew then what to expect and what you could do better. So then when you went out there, you didn't go, holy shit,
it's a steep hill.
What have I got myself got it into? Whereas me, I just rocked up and did it. I'm like, oh my God, do I regret doing this? But it goes for anything in life. Like, you just got to put yourself out there, and the first time you ever do something or experience something, it may not be the best, but the second time you're going to learn from that experience, and you're going to be able to have the tools to be able to better do that.
Yeah, I've been going through that recently with my wife about the marathon. So I mean, I mentioned to you, but probably helps to provide a bit of context. Sydney Marathon in a couple of weeks. My wife, it's a lifelong journey to want to run a marathon. She signed up. I said I'd do it with her. She found out today that she's got a stress fracture. She's not going to be able to do it, but she decided about a week ago, just due to her training program and how everything's gone, that she wouldn't be able to do it. And that was really disappointing for her because she'd set everything up, like her mind set everything towards achieving this thing. And then there's that failure that you're confronted with. And she was really upset at the start, and that's totally understandable. But it wasn't until she actually took a moment to write down some of the things that she learned throughout this training process where she actually saw the value in it. And at the end of the day, like you can, I would say, when it comes to dealing with failure or dealing with setbacks, it's never it's very rarely life and death. There's a lot of times where we'll get a second chance to be able to do something, and marathon's a perfect example. She can always sign up next year, and she's going to know based on how she approached things this year, what she's going to do next year to hopefully avoid some of the struggles that she's had. So it's a perfect example of what this stuff looks like in real life when you don't have to go through the adversity of the shark attack.
Yes.
So it's applicable for a lot of people.
What's your relationship with sharks now? Like, I'm a big animal lover, but I'm fucking petrified of sharks, man. Like I always have like dreams, or I'm scared of like going on a boat and it's sinks and getting attacked by sharks, but they're magnificent creatures.
Yeah.
I have huge respect for them. What's your relationship like with them?
So my relationship today is the same as what it was before. If anything, I have a better relationship today than what I did before, because I was forced to learn about it.
Yep.
I've always had a lot of respect for sharks. I think as a surfer, you have to have some sort of respect for those creatures when you're going in the ocean. As a surfer, you take on the risks of what happens when you are entering the home of another creature like that. It's not that sharks want to go out there and eat people. It's just that they are sharks doing as...
It's usually a misconception. They think you're a seal or something like that.
It's the best way I've seen it described by another shark attack survivor, Paul DeGelder. He just says it's just sharks doing sharky shit. And there's part of that has kind of, I guess, added to that appreciation that I have for sharks. Like I think they're incredible creatures. I think they're amazing at what they do. I've found out firsthand why they are such incredible creatures, and it's not the best way to find out that information, but there's a reason they've been around for as long as they have. They're incredibly good at finding things to hunt and kill so they can survive. But it's not until you actually, like I said, I was forced to kind of learn about sharks, to come to terms with things and to be able to get back in the water. Like to just push it aside, and because it's a common thing that people always say, like it must have been really hard to get back in the water.
Was there anger and resent towards sharks when it first happened?
Never.
Okay.
And a big thing is like I kind of got that presented to me really early on when I was in hospital, and they had done some analysis on the bite marks that were in my leg, and they said, look, based on that, we think it's a great white. We can roughly tell what size it is. They said it was like 2.5 to 3 meters, which is irrelevant to me at the time. So was the species as well, but I didn't realize how relevant it was until they said, if you think it's something else, or if you have other information, let us know, because if it's something else like a tiger or a bull shark, we can go hunt and cull it. And there was something that when I heard them say that, as it just didn't feel right to me to be like, it's like, I guess, strange way of kind of saying it, but imagine crossing the road, getting hit by a car and being like, what model car was it? It's just something that happened. I wanted to move on. And I saw absolutely no benefit in hunting or culling sharks and telling them it was something else. So my perception from very early on was that there was no resentment towards the sharks. And a big part of that was what I said earlier, accepting those risks when you go in the water. But to be able to get back in the water, I say like I was able to do it, and to overcome it was relatively easy for me. The bigger fear that I had at that time was, what was it going to mean for me getting back in the water with surfing? Like if I couldn't surf to the level I was before, what would that say about me? And
so you weren't scared of getting attacked again?
Well,
or were you?
I had to learn about them first.
Yeah.
So what I did was to educate myself. I went and looked at maybe what were some of the conditions that led to the attack that afternoon. You know, time of day, water temperature, what food's in the area, water clarity, all these other sorts of things, to try and see, like, if I was to go again and I could assess these, would I go back in the water?
Yeah.
clear and obvious answer is no. But being able to educate myself in that way and learn more about sharks was such an important piece for me in order to be able to get back in the water with any sort of comfort. And that is why, for me, that was difficult, but in learning more about them, it just increases the appreciation for them. And then the step beyond that was to be able to go and swim with sharks again. And, well, not again, for the first time. Because I didn't mean to do it the first time. So
this is my choice this time.
Exactly. And that, when someone mentioned it to me, I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. And it wasn't until it got to the day where I was like, man, am I actually ready to do this? And that was a fear that I didn't have to overcome. Like, I didn't have to go and do that, but I developed such an appreciation for sharks at that stage where I was like, I kind of just want to see them in their environment and just kind of see how I feel with it, because it's all well and good saying like, yeah, I'm able to get back in the water and it's easy, but it's not until you're confronted with it again that you will actually know how you feel about it. So going for that first swim was a very big moment. And I think there's something so surreal about when you are swimming and you see a shark in the water just moving so effortlessly. It's something. There's only two things that I've experienced in life where time has slowed down. The first one was the attack itself. The second one was seeing a shark swim, because it just felt like such a significant moment seeing this creature just doing its thing in the ocean. And I don't know if that's because it was tied to what had happened before, but I cannot encourage enough people to find somewhere where you can go and do some sort of shark diving.
It's
because
something that I want to do.
Yeah.
I'm scared, but I know it'll be well worth it.
Yeah, it's such an incredible experience. And that's my biggest thing as well. I don't want my experience to stop people going in the water. And I see my role as, if I can go through what I've been through and I can learn what I have about sharks and their role in the ecosystem and how amazing they are as creatures, and I can still go back in the water, then I hope that can be a sign for other people that they can, hopefully not see the ocean as this terrifying
it's
place.
about educating and having respect for these creatures and their home.
Yeah. And I would say, if you see a shark walking down the main street of Penrith, then that's when you maybe reconsider what your relationship with them is.
Do you have nightmares of that attack? Like fucking shark coming at your eyes? Like Never? Really?
I've had one event in the ocean where I've felt uncomfortable and have forced myself to paddle in, just because I don't know if it's not wanting to tempt fate or if it's just being comfortable in the ability to say, no, I don't feel safe and I want to go in. But yeah, that's the only time I've ever had any sort of overwhelming sort of fear response to it. And that's only once, but yeah, no nightmares or anything. And I think something that helps is having a very clear memory of the attack.
Yeah.
I think that helps me not leave it up to my brain and my imagination to piece things together.
And I think because you also, in a way, forgive the shark and you've processed everything that's happened, that it's not going to show up as a nightmare anymore, because it's not like a negative thing that you have.
Mm.
You could have easily played victim and said, fuck, I've been attacked by a shark. I'm not going to go run 50 k's, paddle across 2 islands in Hawaii. How did you end up not being victim and going out there and pursuing these things? Because you said with surfing, you're searching for that next thing. That transferred into what you do now, obviously. You search for the next thing.
Yeah, I guess in a way. I think all of that is kind of driven by my mindset towards goal setting, which is something I credit Scott with, because he kind of set me up with that quote and put things down on paper with saying, like, when it comes to your recovery, it's like, we're going to try and regain the basic things, but what we're really going to go for is something ambitious with surfing. And I think that mindset is something that's helped me a lot in life since the attack. But I think it's interesting, like the idea of, playing victim and saying, like, this is what's happened and like I can be content with this. I don't need to do all these other things. And that's partly true. Like, I don't need to prove myself to anyone but me, really. And I think when I look back at, I use the word gratitude a lot for it. I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do the things that I do. And I guess part of it is knowing how quickly things can change and how much you want to make the most of the opportunities you do have. I always say there's not enough people championing the idea that life is short. Something we hear all the time, but it's easy to forget. And everyone always has those moments where they'll realize it. You know, my favorite quote by far, everyone has two lives. Our second begins when we realize we have only one life. And it's so true. And people realize that in different ways. I've realized it more than once, because even since the attack, like, that's got me to realize that life is short and that I want to do a lot of different things with the time that I have on this planet. But I can still find times where I'm like lacking motivation, and I'm like, well, what do I need to do to get back to that point? And it helps have something tangible, which is why I spend a lot of time on what goals I want to achieve. And I kind of break my goals into two separate categories at the moment. One of them is what I want to do is sharing the story, which for a long time was making the film and doing the speaking, doing podcasts, all those sorts of things there. And then the other one is around challenging myself and putting myself in positions where I have to display that resilience. It kind of speaks to building that muscle. And that's why I go and do things like the 50K and all those difficult things, because I want to put myself in a position that gives me the same feeling I had through the attack and the recovery, those feelings where things are really tough, you want to give up, but what can you find that'll make you want to push through? And for me, it's a confirmation of everything I've learned along the way. There's a lot of things that help me get through some of those physical challenges that help me through the recovery. There's so much to be said for challenging ourselves and putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions in a more controlled environment than a shark attack.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of value in that for everyone, but that all starts with the goal. And for me, that is something I'm big on. I've actually started trying to put a little bit more around tangible goal setting in some of the presentations and stuff I do, because I think it's so important that, you know, we actually take a step back and ask ourselves what direction we're going in. And to be ambitious with those goals and to know that you can only really learn whether you achieve it or fail.
Do you have any piece of advice for someone that, you know, they've gone out, they've set their goals, they're working towards it, but then they just feel themselves in a tough spot, like knowing that they're putting in the work, but they feel like they're not moving forward? Any advice for that person listening right now?
I've always felt like when you get to that point, it's the ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to keep persevering. And I know that's it's probably one of the most basic things that you can say, right? But it's so true. I've felt multiple times, whether it be through some of those challenges that I've done, but specifically through the recovery after the attack, where you feel like everything's stagnant and you're not making the progress that you were at the start. And I think a lot of it has to do with perspective. If you take a step back and realize how far you've come up until that point, you realize that you've actually achieved quite a lot. Whether you achieve the goal in the end, that's neither here nor there for me a lot of the times. I try and avoid like what the end result is and focus on being proud in the stuff that you do in the middle.
It's a journey.
Exactly. And it's the biggest cliche ever, right? And I love cliches because they're all true. And it's just, it kind of feels corny saying things like that from time to time, but it's so true. What you do in the middle is what you can be proud of, because sometimes you can wake up and you don't want to go and do like train for the marathon or train for the 50K or whatever it is. There's so many times where you don't want to do the work, but just the ability to put that one foot in front of the other and just attempt it to try and be better than what you were yesterday, that takes courage for a lot of people. Like, you're never going to wake up one day and leap to the end. Like, for everybody, it's a process. So if we can take a step back and realize how far you've come so far and realize that the next step is only going to get you a little bit closer to where you want to go, then I think there's so much value in that. And if you don't achieve it, like I said, it's probably not life and death. You can always try again, use the things that you've learned there to maybe approach it differently, or to even reevaluate the goal and see if that's something that you still care about or something that you want to do. And if you do, then you'll be just as fired up to do it again next time.
It's enjoying the process, enjoying the journey. Like, for example, this podcast, I didn't have really any goals on where I was going to go, but just by turning up and putting in the repetitions, I'm like, fuck. I mentioned to you before, I have over 250 episodes now. There's been plenty of times I'm like, fuck, why am I doing this? Should I give up? Like I hit those rough patches, but through just turning up, you come out the other side and you're like, oh fuck, just keep putting in the work. And it's like an addiction to keep growing and to keep getting better, even though you may not reach this massive goal, whatever you set, but that journey is why you're doing it. Because imagine if you woke up one day and you achieved everything you wanted without the journey, without putting in the work. it wouldn't mean anything to you. It wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't be fulfilling. So I think the fulfillment actually comes from the journey, not so much from achieving the massive goal.
Definitely. And like you will get a boost from the goal.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But that's you can't like that doesn't give you something tangible to take into whatever you want to achieve next, because everyone's always going to want to, like, you achieve something, you ask yourself, okay, what's next? And the achievement of that goal doesn't help you with the next goal. But what you did in the middle, that's what actually helps you with the approach that you take or the process that you might put in place in order to get there. So it's so true that that's where the real value is.
What's your relationship with pain now? Because obviously you've gone through what you've gone through. Do you have a good relationship with pain?
Depends what context, I guess.
Because obviously you're doing all these races, these big things. So obviously physical pain you're fine with and you're chasing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think my relationship with physical pain is one that I see as a very easy one to navigate. And I think that kind of goes back to how I approached things when I was in hospital. Like I was always afraid of like when they do the assessments in hospital, they ask you like what your pain level's like, and you're always, there'll be people that give different ranges on the scale of 1 to 10. And I was always afraid to go over like a 4, because I was like, what if someone else has something that's more painful? But yeah, like I always, with some of those other challenges I've done, like the pain has always been a part of it. It's inevitability. But I guess the more difficult pain to deal with is like the emotional pain that we all kind of experience and suffer at some point in life. And whilst I've been through something significant, which has been very painful in dealing with, I think that's the harder one to manage, because it's not always as simple as like physical pain where you can point to it and say, that's why it's sore. Here's what I can take to make it feel better. Like when it comes to emotional pain, what you can do to actually work through it can be different from time to time. And it's not something where you can look at someone else who's been through it and be like, give me what you had. Like everyone's approach is going to be different. So that's something that if I had to rank which one was more difficult to deal with out of the two, it's emotional pain by far. But I think I have learned a lot and developed a really, really good network to help me deal with whatever that pain might be for certain things that I might face at some point in the future. That being said, like I don't know if anything, well, I'm sure there will be other things that I face in life that will make me feel the same as the attack and the recovery. But up until this point, I'm not sure if it's because I've been better at dealing with that pain that it hasn't felt as significant, or if it just hasn't been as significant. But knowing what to do again is such a big part of helping deal with those things, and it's all personal for everyone.
Yeah, that's it. So many people compare their pain to other people's, and as you mentioned before with the stroke, that was his 3rd time going through a stroke, whereas the other guys, it was their 1st time. They're going to have different reactions to it. Just like with poor mental health, someone may have been struggling with depression for 10 years. Someone may have just started struggling with depression for their 1st year. It's like, it's going to be different how someone perceives it, how they deal with it. Very, very personal. But as long as we can have the tools or learn and educate and gain those tools to be able to understand it for starters, and then be able to better deal with it, then we can move through it. And it's not about forgetting what's happening. Like an analogy like I like to say is, we may go through traumas or a shark attack, and this is actually a good example for you. You have scars in your leg, right? They heal over, but it's still the resemblance of what happened. It's same with emotional pain. You may have a cut in you somewhere. Not a real cut, I should say. And you may have moved through that, like a relationship breakup or something like that, and scar tissue heals over that, but it's still there. You can't forget about it. So many people try to forget about it, and I think that's why it stays within you and you never actually move through it, because you're trying to push it away, but you've never quite dealt with it. And people need to learn to deal with that.
Yeah, and then even when you do deal with it, the scar's still going to be there, but it's then your relationship with the scar.
It's part of your journey.
And again, I guess that physical comparison, and the reason why it's interesting to compare like a physical scar and what might be an emotional scar is it's very easy to see the physical scar.
Yeah.
But with the emotional scar, it's not as easy to see. It's not as easy to pinpoint and say that's why. You can't really measure it a lot of the times. So that's why I think a lot of people would struggle with that more often. But it is really about that relationship with it. And going back to a physical scar of mine in the leg, I've come to terms with that now to the point where that is almost something I'm proud of. Whereas early on, it was something like I wore a tight, because they gave me compression tights when I was kind of going through my rehab to help with the blood flow. And I just wore those because I didn't want people to see the scar, because I thought that was something that made me different, something that people might not want to look at because it was confronting. And then I kind of just got to the point where I came to terms a little bit more with the experience for myself. And as that happened, I came more to terms with the fact that that was not something to be ashamed of. And that was actually something that I was quite proud of. And it's really, I think that kind of speaks, it's more of a physical example of what those two things are that you mentioned before. And that journey of being comfortable with it takes time. And that's the same with emotional scars as well.
Definitely. And you mentioned to me earlier your passion towards mental health. How is your story and what you're doing helping in this space?
I guess a big part of it is getting people to realize that, I mean, the worst feedback I get when I share the story is for people to be like, you know, what I took away from you was that, you know, next time I'm going through a struggle, I'll look at him and be like, he went through all this, my struggle's nothing. And that's not what I want people to take away from it. That's the worst thing I want people to take away from it, because it belittles what they're going through. My big belief is, and I guess it kind of drives the fact that trying to make a shark attack more relatable for someone that won't experience it, is that's just struggle. Like my struggle is a very engaging one that people will listen to. But at the end of the day, everyone goes through their own version of the shark attack. And everyone is going to have to deal with these things in life, which are going to force a response pretty similar to the one that I went through. And it's not necessarily about comparing what you're going through to someone else, but it's about acknowledging that within yourselves and knowing that the next step is in your control. And that's something that I think just having that story that I can share is very powerful, because that's what gets people to listen. And that's why I've taken on the ownership and the responsibility to want to share that. It would be very easy for me to not want to talk about it because it's a traumatic event. But I've seen far more good come out of it than the opposite. So that's kind of where I see my space in getting people to look at mental health a little bit differently and to acknowledge their own version of the shark attack, because it's something we'll all have to do at some point.
Definitely. And yeah, I respect that, because a fair few people go through traumatic experiences like that and they just don't speak about it. But through you speaking and making it relatable for everyone, people can realize, wow, I'm not the only one that goes through these struggles. My struggle may be different to that person over there, but we all go through it at some level. But we can all come out the other side of it as well. We can all work through it and deal with it and gain the tools and the knowledge. So then when we are hit with adversity again, we're better prepared for it. Now, as you said, you can't prepare for a shark attack, but I'm sure if you get attacked by a shark again, you could probably be better prepared in some sense.
Yeah, I'd hope so.
So yeah, it's massive respect for people like yourself that go out there, and especially for someone who's naturally introverted, to be out on stage and speaking to people. Like, I know firsthand how daunting and how nervous and anxious I was, and I know you probably felt the same. So for you to go out there and do that and have the impact that you're doing, man, it's fucking amazing.
Yeah, man, it's like we said earlier, it's all purpose based. And I've said it a bunch of different times, but if it gets to the end of everything I've done, help one person, and I know already it's helped more than one person. So probably the most touching thing I've had so far was after the film came out. So the film came out on the 9th of March this year, and I got a message the day after. So this person I had no relation to, no connection to, they just messaged me on Facebook. They said they watched it 3 times already, and this was in 2 days. So spent the time to watch it 3 times already. And this lady was like, really, really inspired by your story. I went through a stroke, which was pretty fitting based on the people that I spent time with. So I could kind of empathize a little bit with that point of view. But she said, I went through a stroke 3 years ago and it's inspired me to book in my first physiotherapy session. I want to learn to walk again. And when I get that message, I know that it's all worth it. And that's something that there's no way I would have been able to have that sort of impact on someone before the attack happened. Again, going back to why it's the best day of my life.
What's next? What does the next 5 years look like? Have you planned that far ahead or thought about that far ahead?
I try. Like I work in sort of 12-month windows usually, with a bit of an idea of what the ideal future would look like in 5 years. But man, to be honest, if I could keep sharing the story, keep doing the speaking thing, that's been something that has led to a lot of growth within me, to be able to overcome a lot of those fears that come alongside getting in front of people and speaking. And I've learned a lot about myself throughout that process. So I would love to be able to continue growing as a speaker and to just speak to more and more people. And then I will always have some sort of physical challenge to want to do. And then the next step for me is to be able to kind of go down the route of helping other people share their own story. And that's going to be a big passion of mine in the next couple of years, is finding out the best way to do that, whether it is through film itself, or whether it's just through kind of helping people out with a bit of advice in the speaking space, because it's a strange thing to try and navigate as someone who doesn't know much about it. And I can only really offer what I've kind of learned along the way. But if that's going to help someone else to be able to, affect someone the same way I did with that lady who booked in the first physio session, then that's just someone else that I can be happy enough and proud enough to have helped. That's
awesome, man. And hindsight's a beautiful thing, eh? You go from just being so zoned in on surfing, then shark attack, to now doing all these amazing things. And yeah, it's crazy to think you wouldn't be here, like in this position today, if that shark didn't attack you that day.
100%. You could run through the simulations of what life would look like if that didn't happen. I have no perceivable answer of what I think my life would look like. Maybe there's a world where my dreams would have come true and I qualified for the world tour and I'm living out 11-year-old Brett's greatest dreams. Maybe there's a world where that didn't work out, but I developed another role or started something in the surfing industry that meant a lot. But even if I think the best case scenario there happened, I'm probably a lot more happier and connected to purpose doing what I'm doing now.
It's crazy how people find their purpose, or their purpose becomes more aware to them when they go through experiences like that. That's why I say, like, everything happens for a reason. And in that moment, you're like, why did a shark attack me? Why did this happen to me? My surfing dream is gone, but fast forward, was it 7 years it's been?
Yeah.
7 years now, to be in the position you are now, you're like, fuck. As you said, it's the best day of my life. I'm so grateful for that shark. Yeah. And respect for you not having it killed as well, man. That's a massive thing. We have a closing tradition on the podcast where the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who it is. So the question for you is, what's the best advice you would tell your teenage self?
It's so funny that this is the question. I actually close a lot of my presentations with, what advice would you give to a young
Oh, really?
And it's funny. Like I love the question now. I used to hate it. I used to despise the question because I was like, I would have to have something like real profound that you tell a younger version of yourself. And I don't think you have to think that deeply about it, because there's kind of 3 bits of advice I'd give to myself. Number 1 is, don't go surfing on the 30th of March 2016. That's the practical one. The second one is kind of where the bulk of the advice would sit. Like I'd love to sit him down, tell him about the attack, tell him about everything I'd been through and everything I'd learned along the way. Although I feel like he wouldn't be able to truly understand that until he went through it for himself, which renders advice number 1 useless, because he needs to go through that.
Yeah.
But there's also something that's pretty negative about preparing a younger version of yourself for the worst day of their life. So I'd say, let's think about things positively for a moment and say, what are the 3 things that I've learned along the way that you can implement today? And if I look at goals, I'd say set yourself a goal that you can achieve in a week. I'd say have a conversation with someone that means a lot to you. I'd say go and do something that you love to do, because there are 3 proactive things that you can do that will not only prepare you for that worst day, which will eventually come, but you're just going to be in a better place this afternoon after you put those things down on paper and commit to them. And I think there's a lot to be said about those small tangible things that we can do as part of our week that better us as humans. And that's something that I'd probably pass off and say, have a go at this and see how far it takes you.
Where can people find you? As I mentioned, they can watch the doco and Stan, but if they want to follow you, social medias.
I'm social media wise, I'm probably most active on the Instagram.
Yep.
Just Brett Connellan, pretty easy to find. Any other information's on my website, which is just www.brettconnellan.com. That's got anything someone might need in order to find out more about what I do, find out links to the film, find out about speaking stuff. My email's on there, so if anyone wants to chat or has any questions, I'm an open book.
Awesome. Brett, thank you so much, man.
Man, thank you.